little bit bigger. Good morning, and thank you to the organizers for accommodating me as I'm not fit for travel right now. Um, this talk is based on a chapter I published in a book on territorial governance. So the title of my talk, which is the title of my chapter, as opposed to the title for my talk in the conference agenda, is Territorial Governance in Outer Space, Order or Chaos. And right now it's a little bit of both. Next slide. Is outer space a territory? Well, I'm no space lawyer, but I say no. However, I will remember for a long time that NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman at his second confirmation hearing referred to the moon and Mars as real estate. And I found that appalling, actually. But this is the direction we're going in with more and more states parties and more private actors getting involved in space activities. And again, if elements of outer space are declared territories, if so, by whom? And we have low Earth orbit, which is becoming increasingly congested, geostationary orbit, cislunar space, the space between Geo and the moon, and other planetary bodies. So again, and I'll have another slide about this, I don't think we should be declaring any parts of space as territories, let alone real estate. Okay, so this is the basic international law governing space activities by all the signatories. And I think there are 120 some signatories right now to the treaty, including the US and Russia. I don't think China is a signatory. I should have checked on that. But it basically declares, and again, this is a treaty on principles, and I will get back to principles and other terms in a few slides, that the exploration and use of outer space shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interest of all countries and shall be the province of all mankind. So who's left out right now? Most African countries have no, well, I don't think any African country has launch capability. There are several African countries that have organized space agencies, including South Africa, but things are changing quickly. And outer space shall be free for exploration and use by all states. And outer space is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means. To me, again, I'm not a lawyer, but this language is very clear. And my dear friend Eileen Galloway, who passed away several years ago, she's considered the mother of space law and policy. She was one of the US delegation sent by then Senator Lyndon Johnson to help write this treaty. And so we had many a long conversation about what the treaty says, what it means, how it's been interpreted. But right now it is the foundational international space law. The United Nations has a whole bunch of other space-related treaties and conventions, for instance, astronaut rescue and stuff like that. But I'm not going to get into that right now. So this is the point I've already made, I hope. The treaty principles declare that outer space and the planetary bodies it contains are not and should not be considered territories. And of course, many others disagree. And the United States does not recognize outer space as a global commons. So again, this is language that comes out of United Nations document and many other documents too. But the United States does not recognize outer space as a global commons. So here we have a little bit of governance of space activities. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration in the US, licenses space launches. The International Telecommunication Union allocates radio spectrum and orbit slots. Sometimes there's a bit of tug and pull about who gets what there, but it seems to work in a fairly orderly way. And the US Department of Commerce is in the process of developing a space traffic Coordination Service. Again, because particularly low Earth orbit is increasingly congested. I mean, SpaceX is launching, thousands of uh, in 2023 there were 4,000 Starlink satellites in orbit, and I think there's something like 10,000 now. I'd have to check the number again. But we definitely need space traffic coordination, and there have already been some near collisions of satellites in low Earth orbit. The United Nations maintains a registry of objects launched into space, and pretty much most countries that have launch capabilities have been submitting to the registry. So we know who's putting what and where. Um, and then we have the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs and its Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. COPUOS, as it's called, meets the Scientific and Technical Committee of COPUOS meets for 2 weeks every February. And then there's a legal subcommittee of COPUOS, and I'm not sure what their meeting schedule is. And then COPUOS, I haven't been to, I have been to a Scientific and Technical Committee meeting of COPUOS, excuse me. And it's very interesting to look around the room, and countries that want to be involved but don't have the capability are present there. Um, and they will speak up on their behalf that, just because we're a developing country doesn't mean we should be left behind, left out of the picture. So that's the message that came through at the meeting I attended. National law. I don't know what to think about this. The U.S. Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act of 2015 calls on the president to, quote, facilitate commercial exploration for and commercial recovery of space resources by U.S. citizens and promote the right of U.S. citizens to engage in commercial exploration for and commercial recovery of space resources free from harmful interference. Well, you know, NASA will tell you this is in compliance with the Outer Space Treaty. To me, it's not, but it's in place, it's a law. Um, and that's why I have the question marks there, because I'll get to in another few more slides. How do we enforce all this or enable all of it? More national laws. Luxembourg, for some reason, has decided to get interested in asteroid mining. And so they had on the law on the exploration and use of space resources. United Arab Emirates passed a law providing for private property rights over space resources. Again, I think that's not in compliance with the Outer Space Treaty, but again, um, I seem to be in the minority, at least in the current environment. And in 2022, the Japanese government has a similar law governing the exploitation of space resources, granted a license to the private company iSpace to extract and sell space resources. Russia and China also have expressed an interest in space mining. China has established an International Lunar Research Station Cooperation Organization, whose members are listed in the slide, and also the members of the Asia Pacific Space Cooperation Organization. So more and more countries are getting involved, and they're organizing with or without partnership with the US. And some of you who follow space news may have seen that the director of the European Space Agency said a week or so ago that ESA needs to be more independent of the US. And in the current environment, I think a lot of our partners, for good reason, are looking at the US as an unreliable partner. So all this stuff can change, in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, who knows what it's going to look like. But right now it's very busy. And the point at the bottom is that there is no global agreement on whether or how the Outer Space Treaty permits the exploitation of space resources for public or private sector uses. So again, you have these national laws in place. You have various groups that are advocating for space mining. You have various companies who have expressed an interest in mining space resources. It hasn't happened yet. I hope it takes a lot longer than people are saying it will. And actually, I wish it wouldn't happen at all. I think we have enough problems to take care of here. But that's my 10 cents worth again. And then you're all probably familiar with NASA's Artemis Accords. And again, principles, here's that word principles for the exploration and use, in my opinion, meaning exploitation of the moon, Mars, asteroids, and comets. And in section 10, I'm not going to read all this. This is a really interesting paper by a legal scholar named Rosanna Duplano. She says this section of principles, the Artemis principles, provides a peculiar interpretation of the principle of non-appropriation of celestial bodies contained in Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty. And I absolutely agree. And again, these accords state that extraction of space resources does not inherently constitute national appropriation. Um, I agree with Rosanna Duplano in her interpretation of the accords. And you can see there's actually been a couple more people who have joined on as signatories to the Artemis Accords. Excuse me. But who's missing? Two of the biggest players, China and Russia. The only two countries that are signatories that have what I would call significant space capabilities are India and Japan. Most of these other countries are launching their own satellites, but they don't have their own launch capability. Well, Rocket Lab is in New Zealand, but that's not a national launch capability. So, let's see. So we have a couple of strategies in the United States, a national security strategy and a national cislunar strategy. And again, I'm not going to read all these words for you. Um, but again, you got, USA number one, USA number one. We have to be the world's leader in space and work alongside the international community to ensure the domain's sustainability, safety, stability, and security. So let's how we see how we do. And now with the Space Force has a budget, I don't know, it's like twice as much as NASA's budget, and they're asking for more. Sorry, I've got a dry mouth. Um, and the State Department in 2023 published the first national strategic framework for space diplomacy. And now here I want to read, this is from an article in Nature magazine last month. I have to put my glasses on for this. And it's called On Space Diplomacy. And the authors write, space governance today relies on ad hoc negotiations, bilateral arrangements, and treaty processes that move slowly. These frameworks operate mainly in isolation, with no joint venue for developing operational norms, limited participation from industry and the scientific community, and no binding enforcement mechanism. And I think that latter point is really important. No binding enforcement mechanism. And National Cislunar Strategy, again from 2022, U.S. will lead the world in responsible, peaceful, and sustainable exploration and utilization of cislunar space. So consistent with U.S. space priorities framework. And I love this part since I'm a social scientist. I don't see it happening in the current administration. The strategy also calls for support of social science research related to crewed exploration and permanent inhabitation of deep space. Many unresolved issues regarding space exploration cannot be resolved through engineering alone, such as the guiding ethics of human expansion in space. And NASA's Office of Science Policy and Strategy, OTPS, which was eliminated by the administration last year, was starting to produce some really good work. And there's a report by a historian that was published a couple years ago by OTPS before it got shut down, It's called Governing the Moon, a History. And I contacted the author. He's not working on space stuff anymore, but it's a good report and it's free, available online. Just Google Governing the Moon, a History, and you'll find it. Then we get to ethics. Whose ethics? What legal, ethical, and other value systems should govern human settlements and other activities in space? So, uh, and as I mentioned here, there have been various organizations and self-appointed groups of people who have been trying to address some of these questions.